Hey everyone, here we are today in Mark chapter 13 as we are continuing to walk through the New Testament together. And today is entitled, As the End Draws Near. You know, we live in a time in which people are anticipating the return of Christ and the end of the world as we know it to be drawing near. We see people point to the evidence of things like wars and rumors of war and earthquakes and all of these other dynamics, which we recognize have existed throughout all of humanity. We know that because even the Apostle Paul believed the return of Christ was imminent and very soon in his life, and believed it may even happen in his life. And so, yes, today we are drawing near every single day. And in Mark 13, we find some encouragement, but we also find some truths that are important as we consider the end of the world as it draws near. And I think there's four things to remember. I think, first of all, we recognize in Mark 13 that the success of religion in the eyes of humanity is often very different than the success in the eyes of God. You know, in Mark 13, we find that the disciples really viewed the temple as the evidence of success, that structure that was there. And we recognize that Jesus was pointing to them that success is not based on the building, it's not based on those type of things, but instead it's based on faithfulness. And so we recognize that just like the disciples, you and I can have moments of struggle of misidentifying what success is in following the Lord. So as the end draws near, we need to recognize that success is not based on our programming, our structures, our building, but rather success is based on the faithfulness to fulfilling God's calling upon our lives as a church and also as individuals, that we are disciples who are making disciples. I think the second thing we see is that there will be constant turmoil in the world as the end draws near. And I think you and I recognize, we look around the world and we would say that there is constant turmoil. We recognize there are famines and wars and natural disasters. We see that sin is really prevalent and being lived out, and we see that fallen nature of humanity that is causing turmoil around us. They saw it in their life as they were living definitely in the shadows of the Roman Empire. And we know in the early church facing persecution and turmoil because of what was going on in society. And so we see the same occurring today as we look around us. I think the third truth that we see as we think about Mark 13 is the truth that believers will face persecution. Now, living in the West, we don't understand this quite as much as those living in other portions of the world who face persecution each and every day for following Jesus Christ. In the early church, that persecution came against them from Rome. We know that even under the Emperor Nero, there was great persecution of the early church. And we know today that all around the world that there are believers who, when they meet together, face the reality of death because of their faithfulness in the Lord. And so we need to understand that as the end draws near, persecution of the church will grow because people do not want to hear the truth, and as a result will do everything possible to stop the movement of the truth. And I think the fourth thing that we need to recognize is that you and I do not know the time of the return. We need to recognize and remember that Jesus himself said that only the Father knows the time of the return, that he as the Son doesn't know that. And so if Jesus is on a need-to-know basis about the return, that he is coming back and the timing of that, then you and I need to recognize that we must not get overly consumed about when the return will occur, but you and I must learn to live in the truth that it will occur, and that you and I must be ever ready for the return of Christ and be ever on mission so that others will be ready for the return of Christ. As we think about again, Mark 13, I challenge you to consider these things about the end of the world. Are you ready as the return of Christ does draw closer every day? But make sure you're faithfully on mission and not overly concerned about when the return will happen, but you are steady and confident that you are ready when the return occurs.